Hello everyone and welcome to another Java tutorial video. So in this lesson we are going to create another network-based application. So let's take a look at our expected output. Let me run the game server first. So this application accepts two players. So let's run the first player. Now as you can see the first player is connected but you don't see the GUI yet. The GUI is only going to come out once both players have actually connected. So let's go ahead and run the second player. And as you can see, the windows are now visible. So let's take a look at the player one window first. So player one is the left blue square. And then you can move the squares using the arrow key. So if I move in player one, I will be moving in the other player's console as well. And then the same thing goes for the other player. So the other player is the red square on the right. So if you move using the arrow keys, the red square should also move in the player one console. So this is what we will be learning how to create in this video. So I've got a new NetBeans project here, and I'll start off by creating a class called player sprite. So this class is going to be for the character, which is just going to be a square. So maybe for your project, you might want to draw something a little more interesting, but let's keep it simple for now. So we want to import a couple of classes. Import java.awt.asterisk, and we want to import java.awt.geom.asterisk as well. Then let's go ahead and create a couple of fields. So I will have a couple of double fields, one for the x, one for the y, and then another for the size of the square, which is going to be for the width and the height. Okay. And then I will make a field for the color of the square. And then let's go ahead and make the constructor. So we'll pass values for the x and the y. We'll hold it in A and B. Then this one is going to be for the size, and then for the color. So x will be equal to A, and y will be equal to B, and size will be equal to S, and then color will be equal to C. So that's it for the constructor, and next I will create a method for drawing the sprite. So let's call this draw sprite, and it's going to accept a graphics 2D object. And then we are going to use the rectangle 2D.double class in order to draw the square. So let's call this square is equal to new rectangle 2D.double. So we pass to it x and y. And then we pass size for the width and size for the height as well, because it's a square, so both width and height will be equal. And then let's go ahead and set the color. So we pass to it the color field, and then finally we go ahead and fill our shape with the square object. Alright, so that's it for the method that draws the sprite. And then next I will create methods for incrementing the x and the y. So first I will call a method named moveH. So this one accepts a double value. So this one will be the value by which to increment x. So x plus equals n. So if we want to move the object to the right, we give it a positive value, and if we want to move it to the left, we give it a negative value. So the same thing goes for the vertical movement. So let's call that one move v. Okay, so it accepts a parameter as well, n, so y plus equals n. And then I'll create a couple more methods. So this next one is going to be named setX. And then it accepts a double value as well. So this one allows me to to replace the value of x completely. So I will say x is equal to n. And then I will create another one for the y property. Okay, so it accepts a double, and then y is equal to n. So these first two allow me to increment the current value of x and y respectively. And then these next two allow me to replace the values of x and y completely. So you'll see later on why this becomes useful. Okay, and then lastly, we need two more methods. So we need our get methods that allow us to get the value of x and y. So public double get x. So this one is simply going to return x, and then another one that allows us to get y. So this one returns y. And that's it for our player sprite class. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create the JFrame. So I'll create a new class. I'll call this one player frame. And then let's go ahead and import a couple of packages. So import java.awt.asterisk, and then import java.x.swing.asterisk. And then don't forget to extend JFrame. And then let's go ahead and create a couple of fields. So I will have fields for the width and the height, and then another field for the content name. And then let's go ahead and create the constructor. So this one will have two parameters. So width will be equal to w, and height will be equal to h. And then I'll go ahead and create a method called setupGUI. So first thing I want to do here is get the content name. And then let's set the title. So let me just put a placeholder here. And then, hold on, made a mistake here. So content pane, okay. So this dot set title, and then let's go ahead and set the preferred size of the content pane. So set preferred size, okay. New dimension, and let's pass to it the width and the height. So after that, let's set the default close operation. So JFrame dot exit on close. And then let's call the path method. And finally, let's set the visibility to true. Okay, so now we can go ahead and create our main method, public static void main string args. So we'd like to instantiate our player frame. Player frame pf is equal to new player frame. And let's give it a width of 640 and a height of 480. And then let's go ahead and call the setup GUI method. All right, so now if we run this, we should have our JFrame. And there it is. All right, so now we add the code that's going to draw the sprite on the stage. So I will start by creating a field for the sprite. I'll call this one me. So eventually we'll also draw another one for the other player. So we'll call that one enemy, but for now, let's just go ahead and create one. And then I will create a helper method to instantiate the player sprites. So I'll call this one create sprites, So again, for now, we'll just be making one. So me is equal to new player sprite. And then we'll give it the initial X and the initial Y, as well as the size and the color. Okay. So next, let's create our J component where we will actually draw the sprite. So private class, let's call this one drawing component, extends J component. So we want this one to override the protected void paint component method. So this one accepts a graphics object. So first thing we'll do here is we are going to upgrade our graphics object into a graphics 2D object. Let's call it G2D. And then let's go ahead and draw the sprite. Let's call the draw sprite method of the player sprite class. Okay. So now that I have this drawing component inner class, I'll go back up here and I will create a field for it, drawing component DC. So eventually I want to instantiate the sprites and make the drawing component and add it to the content pane. So I will do that here inside the setup GUI method. So I want to create the sprites first. I want to make sure that the sprites exist before I actually make the drawing component. So DC is equal to new drawing component. And then I will add the drawing component to the content pane. So content pane.add DC. So now if I run this, I should have my player sprite. And there it is. So now let's go ahead and add the code that will allow us to move the sprite using the arrow keys. So first I want to import java.awt.event. This is because I need the action listener and key listener interfaces. Okay. So for the movement of the sprite, I'm going to use a timer to animate the movement. So first I will create a field for the timer. Let's call it animation timer. Then I will create a method that will set it up. So I can make this one private. I don't plan on calling it outside of the class. So I'll name it setup animation timer. So I'll declare an integer. I'll call this interval and give it a value of 10. This will determine how fast the timer runs. And then I need to create the action listener. So I will make an anonymous class for this one. So I'll make a variable called AL. It's going to be equal to new action listener. Okay, and then don't forget the semicolon at the end. So we're going to need to override public void action performed. So inside the action performed method, we want to increment the X or the Y of the sprite. So let's go ahead and make it move up first. So I will create a variable called speed. So I'll give it a value of 5. So this will determine how fast the sprite is going to move. I want to make it move up first. So I will call the moveV method of the player sprite class and pass to it a negative speed value in order to make it move up. So I will call me, which is the sprite, and then move v and pass to it negative speed. And of course, in order to see the component update, we have to call repaint. Okay, so now we can go ahead and create the timer, animation timer is equal to new timer. So we pass to it the interval. So the interval is a value that's going to be in milliseconds. So this means that our interval is 10, which means it's 10 milliseconds, which means that when the timer starts running, the action performed method is going to get called once every 10 milliseconds, and it's going to execute these instructions inside. And then of course you want to pass the action listener object in order to register the correct method, action performed method to the timer. Okay, and then don't forget to start the timer. So I want to call this method here in the setup GUI method, just right after set visible true. So once the JFrame pops up, I want to go ahead and activate the timer right away. So now when we run this, we should see our sprite immediately move up. And there it is. Okay. So I actually don't want it to move right up. I don't want it to move up right away. I want it to move up only when I actually press on the up key. So we are going to need to add a couple more things. We need to add, first I will add a boolean. Okay. Private boolean. Then I'll call this one up. And then initially I want to set it up to false. So this will be set to true when I press the up key, and then when I release the up key, it's going to get set back to false. I will use this to create a condition that will only call this specific line if up is actually true. So if up then we want to call move v and pass to it a negative speed value. So this line actually only gets called when up is true. Okay. So right now, if we run this, because up is false, we actually won't see the sprite move up. If I run it, there, it stays in place. So the timer is actually running at this point. So the timer is running at a constant rate of once every 10 milliseconds. So what you see here in the action perform method gets executed. It's just that when we get to this line that checks whether up is true or false, it sees it as false and therefore does not actually increment the speed, or in this case decrement, to make it move up. So now what we want to do here is we want to add the key listeners that will allow us to set the value of up to true whenever we press the up key. So I will create another helper method for that. Private void setup key listener. Okay. This one we want to use the key listener interface. So let's make an anonymous class for this one as well. Key listener KL is equal to new key listener. And don't forget the semicolon. Okay. So when you implement the key listener interface, you have to override 3 methods. So first one is public void key pressed. No, sorry, key typed. It actually doesn't have to be in a specific order, but and it's not an action event; it's a key event. Okay. So this one we won't actually use, so I can just leave it blank. And then after that, we've got public void key pressed. So this one we will definitely use. Okay. So we want to set up to true whenever we press the up key. And then key released. So this one we will use as well. Okay, so whenever we press a key, we want to get the key code first. This allows us to determine which key was pressed. So the key code is an integer, and we can get it to the key event object. So k.get key code. Okay, so any key that's pressed returns a code, and then we want to check that in a switch statement. So switch key code. Okay. So in the case where key code is equal to key events dot vk underscore up. Okay. So in other words, when we actually press the up key, we want to set up to true, then break to end this case. And then for key released, we do the opposite thing. So we want to set up to false instead. So for key released, when we release the up key, so we set up back to false so that the sprite stops moving. Okay? And then we want to go ahead and add the key listener to the content pane. So content pane dot add key listener KL, right, which is our key listener. And then you want to call the set focusable method of the content pane. Focusable, and set it to true. Okay, and then we call this helper method. So we call this after we set up the animation timer. Let's go ahead and set up the key listener as well. Okay, so now if we run this, we should be able to move the square up when we press the up key. So right now I'm not pressing anything, so it's staying in place, and I'm going to press the up key right now, and there it is, it moves. And then I just released it, so now it stopped moving. So after that, we just go ahead and do the same thing for all the other directions. So we have our down, our left, and our right. So we want to go and initialize them to false first. Okay, so up, down, left, and right. And then we go to the key listeners. So we just go ahead and add the cases for the other keyboard keys. Okay. So key pressed. So if we press down, we'd like to set down to true. If we press left, we'd like to set left to true. And if we press right, we would like to set right to true. And then we do the same thing for key released. So this one we do the opposite. We set the booleans back to false. So vk underscore down. So down gets set back to false. And then left. And then right. Then of course we go back up to the action performed method. We want to add the else if clauses for the other directions. So else if down, so we would like to increment the y property instead. Then we do left. So this one is our horizontal movement. So our method for that is move h. So left, give it a negative value to move to the left. And then right. So move h, speed. Okay, so now if we run this, we should be able to move using all the arrow keys. Okay, so up, down, right, left, and there you go. So our key movement is set up.